So let's really dig in and make sure we understand the difference between a static and an instance method. So what do we know so far? All right. Well, we know that there exist static methods, which have the word static in their declaration, and non-static methods, also known as instance methods, which do not, which don't. So static methods are invoked using the class name. So we know, for example, if we want to call a make noise method that was declared like this, we would say dog. Great ethereal sky dog, I would like you to make a noise. And so it will. Instant methods, by contrast, are invoked using an instance name. So I might say, Maya, the dog, please make noise, right? So I create a specific dog, and I say, Maya, make your noise. And an important distinction between them is that static methods, they cannot access my instance variables. I couldn't say system.out.println weight in pounds, because in this case, there is no me. There's just the idea of dogs trying to make the noise, and over here it's a specific dog. Okay. So why? What good is a static method? It seems like the way I've described it, that non-static methods are simply more powerful, but we'll see that there is a natural place for a static method. So for example, some classes, they're just never instantiated. For example, the math class. The way we'll usually, the way we would use the round method of the math class is I would say, mathematics, please round 5.6, which just makes more sense than saying, let's create a specific math, whatever that would mean, and then use im's round, right? So static methods, they have their place that are more natural. Now sometimes classes can actually have a mix. You can have a class that has both static and non-static methods, and what we'll do is we'll build one right here. But I think it'll be more interesting if we jump in live. So let's open up our dog class. And let's say that our goal is we want to be able to compare two dogs. So I'm going to make another dog, D2, dog 100, and I want to compare these dogs. So I might do something like bigger equals, and now I want to say dog.maxDog D2. Okay. Now the idea here is that I don't want either of the dogs to be doing the judging. I want, an expert at dogs. I'll ask the God version of dog to do the judgment. And in that case, it's pretty natural. So let's try it out. So in this case, we want to make a method called maxDog. And it's supposed to take two dogs, D1 and D2. And if D1 is bigger than D2, if D1.weight in pounds is bigger than D2.weight in pounds, we'll return D1. Otherwise, we'll return D2. Now, this is not done yet. So what I want you to do is think for a moment, what is missing here other than this? That's kind of obvious. So what's missing? There's two things. So one of them is this needs a return type. And the other is static, because in this case, we're invoking the method using the class name. Okay. So let's try doing dog launcher, see if everything works. Okay, we try running it. Probably nothing happens. So we'll make the bigger dog make a sound. And let's change the numbers so we actually know what's going on. So 15 and 100. So in this case, if it's working properly, we should get a woof. And indeed, we get a woof. So you might ask yourself, couldn't I also make a not static version? Like public dog, max dog, dog D2. And then I could compare my own self. And yes, you could. You could say, in this case, if my weight in pounds is greater than D2's weight in pounds, then return, and in this particular instance, I want to return a reference to my own self. So we'll use that keyword that I very briefly alluded to earlier and say return this. Otherwise, we'll return D2. Now for clarity, you can also add this so that a reader of your code might say, okay, it's my weight in pounds, because this is a non-static method, so a specific dog is going to do the judging. And an exercise you might do now is try and ponder, how would I call that method? Okay. So what would the call look like? It might look like this. Dog bigger equals d.maxDog D2. And so in that case, this dog does the judging to see, am I bigger than this other dog? And it decides no. And so this method will return the larger dog. So it's up to you. Like, do you feel comfortable having dogs judge themselves against other dogs? Or would you rather have an impartial judge that will just feel more aesthetically correct to you. Either approach is fine. Either will work perfectly. It's just a matter of your dog-related moral aesthetics. So one last thing I want to bring up in terms of static, we're mostly talking about methods, but just as a quick note, we can actually also make static variables. So these are interesting because they're properties that apply to all dogs, and they all share that variable. So for example, we might say all dogs have they have a scientific name. It should be Canis familiaris, assuming my spelling and capitalization is right. And so what that'll do is it'll establish that all dogs have the same scientific name. So I can then go through and say system.out.println the scientific name. And so if I run this, I should hopefully get Canis familiaris. If I print out the other dog, I get Canis familiaris. Though I would argue that both of these are bad style, and that if you're ever accessing a static variable, you should really probably only be using, in any case I can think of, the actual class. So instead of saying, hey Maya the dog, what's your scientific name? I'll say, what is the scientific name for all dogs? So while this syntax works, I don't think it's ever really useful, and it's probably just confusing and might lead you to do bad things. So what I'm going to say is if you ever have a static variable, let's use the class name as a nice, straightforward way of making sure we know exactly what we're dealing with. Okay. So if we look again at this method, this is what we've just built, but I think it's a little more interesting in this bigger context. And so I'll note that a class may have a mix of static and non-static members. And a member is either an instance variable or a method. Okay. So a static member, you should access it using the class name, right? So if I'm saying, what is a dog's scientific name? I would use this notation. If I want to call the static version of maxdog, I would use dog.maxdog. You can use an instance variable, but again, I think it's confusing, so I would say that static members, you really, really should strive to use dog. What I mean by that is, yes, this technically works, but please do this. It'll just make our lives easier. Well, your life easier. Non-static members, by contrast, you cannot invoke them using the class name. You cannot say, great sky dog, please make noise, if the method is declared as follows. Like if I have here in dog, I can't call dog.maxdog. It'll say, cannot call non-static method from static. Wait, no, actually, what will it say? I don't know. Let's find out. What happens if we delete this method, do jog launcher, and then say, yeah, okay. In this case, maxdog, it gets confused. It gives us an error message that's not particularly useful. Sorry, a little bit of a digression. But non-static members, if you only have a non-static version of a method, you cannot use the class name to make noise. It just doesn't make sense, right? It's just not what a static method is. And lastly, if you have a static method and you want to access some kind of instance variables, so for example, this method here, maxdog, if we wanted to actually access an instance variable, we have to specify which instance. We can't take this away, because if we do, we're asking about my instance variables. But the great sky dog, he does not have a weight in pounds. He transcends petty things like particular sizes. Okay. So at this point, if you're new to static versus non-static, it's probably a little confusing, right? That's just how these programming things go. You probably have questions that I haven't answered, so I encourage you to try out the code link that's on the website, experiment with the code, but especially Project Zero will give you a chance to really deeply look into this issue and see how static, non-static, and all of this plays together.